Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be with all of you again. Love coming to this conference. You know, we face adversity of many types in our lives. You know, there's the kind of adversity that gets forced upon you. That could be the loss of a loved one. That could be, in my life, my son, who's adopted from China, the first 4 years of his life were spent in an orphanage. He had to face adversity as a very, very young child. And, you know, I don't really know much about that. None of us know much about it because there really aren't very many records. But we know that he had to face adversity as he talks about some of the things that he remembers that was forced upon him. There's the type of adversity that's forced to happen in our lives. For example, many of you know that 7 years ago, the arthritis in both my knees got so bad that I had to have both of my knees replaced. So to get that and to go through that kind of adversity, to have them both replaced at the same time, was a very difficult thing. Then there's the type of adversity that we choose. We choose, right? In sport, we choose to compete. We choose to get to have adversity enter our lives. And for me, for the purpose of this talk this morning, I chose to climb one of the world's most iconic mountains, Kilimanjaro. Now, think about your own life, though, as I go through what I'm going to share with you today. You know, in our past, we've had to climb mountains in our lives. In our present, some of you might be climbing mountains right now. You're facing big mountains in your life. And if you're not facing one, get ready, because it's coming. That's sort of the thing of life. You know, with social connections, personal relationships, parenting, health issues, you know. So I want you to think a little bit about the mountains you're climbing right now, those proverbial mountains, and let's see if we can apply some of what I learned to do this. Now, the question is, why climb the mountain? Why do this at my age and with a young son? I did it with my son. Well, what stimulated this was when I was 20 years old, my father took me to Alaska. We drove and we camped all the way. And it was so memorable. My father and I were very estranged, by the way. It was a tough trip, but we came closer. We became closer after that trip. But at my dad's eulogy, when he passed away, the pastor who gave my dad's eulogy, almost all he talked about was our trip to Alaska and how my dad constantly talked about it and the memories that it created. And it just hit me that here I'm obviously an older father, I have a young son, and I wanted to create an adventure, a real journey, whether we made it or not. The preparation for the journey, the adventure, how do we do it? And that was really why. So our plan was, we were going to go to Africa, and we were going to take what's called the Lemosho route. So we were going to start on the west side of the mountain, skirt the mountain, do acclimatization hikes. This is about 15,300 feet. Come down, skirt the mountain more, and then at night summit to Uhuru Peak, which is 19,341 feet. So if any of you know, this is about a mile higher than Pikes Peak in altitude. Now, to step back, sport, you know, what we teach at the Human Performance Institute, sport is a living testimony. We started our careers in sport. We do business, we train CEOs and C-suites and entire organizations. But sport is a living testimony. Now, look at these next words. The limitless adaptability of the human system. I mean, our sport, tennis, I really believe it's a metaphor for life in a huge way. A huge way. I can't make the promise that Jolene made, though. Life is terminal. Okay? I mean, I can't make the promise Jolene made. You won't die. I'm not sure. If that happens, we need to bottle it and we will make a lot of money. Okay? I think. Maybe not. So, I want to share with you 10 lessons that I learned from sport that I applied in preparing for and climbing Kilimanjaro with my son. The very first one, change happens. That's number one. Change happens. So in a competition, change happens. The flow of momentum, we all talk about that. But I realized before we even got on the mountain, and as we prepared, we had to be able to adapt to what the mountain gave us. A mountain of this magnitude has its own weather system, for example. You don't know what you're going to get. And by the way, 19,000 feet, it's very difficult to train. You don't know. There's knowns and there's unknowns. So I knew that one of the things that we had to prepare for mentally and emotionally was to adapt to what the mountain gave us. And we have to adapt to what life gives us. We have to adapt to what a tennis match gives us. You hear it all the time with players. I had to take what the opponent gave me. Well, I had to adapt. We had to adapt to the emotional hits in the face we were going to get on the mountain. And I knew that, so we talked about it constantly. Number 2, we must have a good support system. This is a quote from one of my fellow climbers. She's the vice president of global health services for all of Johnson & Johnson. And she said it was the hardest thing she had to do mentally, ever. And I'll tell you, it's the hardest thing voluntarily I've ever gone through in my life. Getting both knees replaced at the same time is tough. But the hardest thing voluntarily I've ever done was probably this. But notice second paragraph I want to share when her husband had to go off the mountain with altitude sickness. So some of our fellow climbers didn't make it. She was alone, proverbially alone. Her adult children were with her. She had all of us with her. But you had to rely on your support system. We in sport have to rely. Sport teaches us to rely on a support system, to have connections. So number 2 is we have to have a support system. Number 3 is always prepare yourself for this question. Always ask what matters most right now. I believe this is why some players struggle and some don't. One of the things I learned from working with world-class athletes is to ask them to answer the question, what matters most to you and why are you doing this? Because if it's about making the money at a world-class level, you don't have a chance. Tell me really what matters most. Why are you doing this? What's the purpose, the sense of purpose behind that? So that's number 3. Always ask what matters most. So to prepare for this climb, I knew we had to get out of our comfort zone. I knew that growth would follow wherever we put our energy. So I used periodization training that we learned from sport. Jim Lehrer and Paul Rodert and I brought this to the U.S. in the late 70s and early 80s, the idea of periodization. We didn't develop it. It was developed by the former Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc countries. The idea of periodization, of active rest, of preparation, of pre-competition and competition phases of training. I adapted that. So I was going to have a training phase, and then go into a pre-competition phase, and then the 8 days we were on the mountain was my competition phase. That was really the approach I took to preparing to climb the mountain. But I knew we had to get out of our comfort zone to expand our capacity. So what I did, I trained aerobically 3 days a week playing tennis. That's what I did. I started about a year before, not quite a year before the climb, about 9 to 10 months before the climb. 3 days a week I played tennis, got my heart rate up pretty high each time, and was able to get my aerobic capacity up. My son competed in karate. He's on the team at his dojo. So he trained 5 days a week. So we did a lot of aerobic training before we ever got into specific training of hiking to prepare for the mountain. So here we are it was a year ago last month in March. The weather was much nicer in the Chicago area than it is right now. It's green there. There's no green yet in the weather. So we started hiking with backpacks and poles to start training our bodies to specifically hike. That's the one thing you hear about when you do treks into the mountains is you've got to specifically train your body to hike with a backpack and using poles. So the places we hiked, again, I'm in the preparation phase. We went to several state parks near us that had river bluffs, and we hiked up and down the river bluffs. I intentionally chose trails like this so that they were very, very rough, because I knew from all the pictures and everything I'd read about Kilimanjaro that it was going to be a very rough trail. There was going to be scrambling over boulders. So we went to Rocky Mountain National Park 3 weeks before we left for Africa. I really wanted to keep seeing how my son responded to altitude, although now as I look back on it, that's kind of funny, because here we are at about 12,000 feet in Rocky Mountain National Park, and you're almost a mile and a half lower than we were going to be on Kilimanjaro. So I'm not really sure how much it really prepared us for Kilimanjaro. But we did choose trails like this. This is an actual trail in Rocky Mountain National Park, and it's simulated a couple of times. I'll show you the Kilimanjaro photos, just going across boulders. And I got to tell you, when you've got artificial knees and you can't really feel where you're going with this is a little sketchy to try to do this and to scramble over boulders. All right. So, point number four. The rest of it are going to be 10 points. Number 4, always have hope. Always see the glass half full. Train yourself that no matter how tough it gets, you see the positive. I believe that sport teaches us that lesson, because if you go south, if you go negative, you're going to lose. You're probably not going to win. You've got to learn how to reverse negative situations and see them as positive. So the most important story was the story that was going on in our minds about how are we going to do this. We can do this. It was a positive mindset that we wanted to take into this. Point number five. Own your goal. Own your stuff. One of the things that really, it's still to this day, and I'm not as involved in coaching as I was earlier in my career, but I will never forget it, and I'm not going to mention any names, but everybody in this room has heard it. When a coach and parents say, "We won, the athlete lost." I'm sorry. You didn't do squat. You supported them. Yes, you were part of the team, but the athlete won and the athlete lost. But now support them in their winning and in their losing. Celebrate their winning. Understand and comfort their losing. Help them grow by winning and losing. But the fact that I heard it so much. We were successful. The athlete lost. Are you kidding me? So it's this story that's going on about owning your goal. For me, on Kilimanjaro, this was really, really important, everyone. My son was 12 years old. He just turned 13 recently. Here's a 12-year-old child. The last thing, if I get to 19,000 feet and he's struggling, the last thing I want him to feel is that I can't let Dad down. Does everybody follow that? That could kill him. 24 people die a year on Kilimanjaro from altitude sickness. So I had to talk to him about, look, if you don't make it, I don't make it. That doesn't mean we're not successful. I said, look, buddy, if I don't make it, you got to go down. You can't go on. So we got to stay together. We're doing this together. But he had to own his goal. He had to own his goal. And that was really, really key. So that's point number 5. Own your own goal. In the emotional dimension, training in this area was really key to try to understand opportunity-based emotions instead of survival-based emotions. Fear is a survival-based emotion. It has a very healthy place to be fear, but I got to tell you, I had no idea how fearful I would be. When we were on this place called this Bronco Wall, it's very famous in Kilimanjaro lore. It's 300 meters straight up, and you scramble on switchbacks over boulders. And the guide, now again, I've got artificial knees, so I have really very little kinesthetic awareness around my knees. But the guide says, Jack, grab this rocky ledge with your left hand, put your left foot on this 3-inch ledge that's covered with mud, and give me your right hand. And it's 100 meters straight down. And I said, dude, this is really important that you've got good hands right now. I had no idea of the magnitude of the intensity. Of course I knew we were climbing a mountain. Of course I realized, but the magnitude, and I believe that sport helped me get through those extremely difficult times. We had to face down fear. I had to understand stress and recovery. For me, especially on summit night that I'll get to in just a moment, this was the most important thing, to understand that we had to recapture energy. You can't get your breath. You don't know, and it was interesting. If I had to do it again, the one thing, what the guides do, they're giving you carbohydrates constantly because you're depleted. Your glycogen and glucose is totally depleted, so they're constantly giving you carbohydrates. I was probably protein, I was protein sensitive. I was deprived. So if I would do it again, I would take protein sticks, a lot, because I think that was really key for me as it went on, that I was feeling a little protein deprived. So we get to the orientation night. We get to orientation night. At this evening, they're telling us how difficult it's going to be, what we've got ahead of us for the next 8 days. We're going to be 8 days on the mountain camping. Right now, we got to point number 6. I believe point number 6, you don't learn it specifically in sport, but you learn it. And that is, and it's interesting, my son's Chinese and it comes from Confucius, so he really loved it. But the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And that was the one thing that I learned, that it wasn't about There was no time limit. Nobody knew what time we were going to get to the summit of Kilimanjaro. Everybody just wants to know, did you make it to the summit of Kilimanjaro? And it was about the voyage of 1,000 miles. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. We said that every day on the mountain. Every day, maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Just take the next step. I know you're tired. I know I'm beat. Let's just take the next step. Let's just keep taking steps, buddy. I mean, that's the encouragement that everybody had for each other, because it's hard to get your breath. But this was the orientation. Okay, so then we got on the mountain and we started climbing. This is in the rainforest. I mean, this was amazing. You're walking in the rainforest, in the jungle, and suddenly there's a black and white colobus monkey right next to the trail as you're climbing in the foothills of Kilimanjaro. I mean, it's just beautiful. And you can see that here we are as a picture of me as we're walking through the rainforest. We're at about 7,500 feet. 7,500 feet to between there and 8,000 feet at this point. And then we got into, you can see how the climate starts to change. We got to about 9,000 feet, 8,000 feet, 9,000 feet, and we're going through the more. Now at the end of the second day of hiking, we've been hiking 10 hours now. We hiked 3 hours the first afternoon, camped. It gets down to freezing every night, so there's ice on the ground every morning. And then the next day was a 7-hour hike. At the end of the 7-hour hike on the second day was the first moment we saw Kilimanjaro. Hadn't seen it at all. The whole time we'd been in Africa and been under the clouds. So we get to the second night on the mountain, and then this is our view. And I cannot tell you the intimidation you feel. Because you've already been going 10 hours, you're at about 9,000, 10,000 feet, and you're going, that's a long way away still. And that's really, really high. And I'm really tired already. And you start thinking, this is one of our guides, 18. By the way, you see the positivity? It's like, here it is. That's where we're going. And we're all going, are you kidding me? Now, one of my fellow climbers, Karen Kenny, who's a dear friend of mine, but she's the head of our Premier Executive Leadership Program, she said, when we first saw the mountain emerge from the clouds, I felt very intimidated. We all did. Wondering how I could possibly get to the top. I had to shift my thinking to just focus on the next step I needed to take. Each day I realized I was stronger than I thought. Think about the growth. And we learned this from sport, everybody, that I could push myself further. It wasn't about making it to the top. It was about taking it one moment at a time, feeling gratitude for the incredible experience, and focusing on the people in my life that matter most. These are my fellow climbers. This was the next morning. We woke up and you can see the ice on the ground, and that was the view of Kilimanjaro. So it's the third morning that we're on the mountain. And then we started hiking. We did some acclimatization hikes, and we just kept climbing. There's our public toilets, the blue tents. Those are called helicopter toilets. That's how you use the facilities on the mountain. It's carried in and it's carried out. It's a fascinating way of life. There are no showers. This was the fourth morning. The fourth morning. The dust and the silt from the mountain was awful. Shen's got his buff over his face. I haven't pulled mine up yet, but it's cold. It's really cold, and we're getting ready for day 4 now to start climbing. Then we get to the next night. You can see we're getting closer to the mountain, but you see how high we are at the campground. It's beautiful, by the way. The beauty was just incredible. No street lights. I mean, you can see the Milky Way at night. I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal to be that high above the clouds and the vision. I will tell you, let me just go back one slide. I will tell you a funny story about me. This is self-disclosure. When we started on the mountain, Shen, my son, was the youngest on the mountain. He was 12 years old, and I was the oldest. I was 65. So my nickname for the porters was Babu when we started. Babu in Swahili means grandpa. And I'm going, I don't really like that. But then, 3 days into the climb, about right here, this is why I wanted to show this, the porters and the guides found out that I had metal knees. And my nickname changed to Chuma Matu. You know what that means? Iron Man. I liked that one. I liked that one. So my next article is going to be From Grandpa to Iron Man in 3 days and how to do it. Okay. So then we got to this is the Bronco Wall I was telling you about. This is where my son realized that his father, who never curses, had mountain mouth. Because every time I looked up, it was like, oh, and then whatever came out. Because this was hard. You're now scrambling, it's vertical, and you're at about 11,000 to 12,000 feet here. Number eight point, keep things in perspective. Keep things in perspective. Whether it's a tennis match, climbing a mountain, life, there are always knowns and there are unknowns. Always keep things in perspective. Nothing is so great, nothing is so little. Keep things in perspective. You can see there's another view of Groppel wall, the verticality of the wall that we had to do switchbacks, and this is true scrambling over boulders. This is every night in the tent. My son, Shen, was playing cards with everybody. His nickname on the mountain became the Big Dog, which is kind of cool for a 12-year-old. But notice that he's laughing. Now, I want to tell you something that's happening now. And this is point number 9. Always have a sense of humor. Always have a sense of humor and be self-deprecating. Everybody was teasing me that Shen never goes to school. He tells me he gets on the bus, but he actually goes to play cards. Because he's really a good card player. It's a little scary. To give you a little bit more about his sense of humor, after we had a very intimidating briefing on summit night, we go back to the tent, and they tell you, they tell you, all you've got, it's going to be monotonous if you're going to be climbing all night, and it's going to be the worst night of your life. They tell you this. And they say, think about your loved ones. Think about your wife or your children, or think about what matters most, because that's what will help you take the next step. It's going to be hard, because you're not going to be able to breathe, and it's going to be really, really hard. So we go back to the tent, and they tell us to rest. I didn't rest. By the way, that was an amazing afternoon I'll never forget. I just watched my son sleep for 3 hours. I couldn't sleep. I was too nervous. But here I watched my son sleep. It was amazing, actually. What an experience. But we got to the tent after the briefing, and I said, I'm just checking this. I said, so buddy, how are you feeling about everything? He looks at me and he goes, well, I think you're a little crazy for bringing everybody here. See, you got to have a little sense of humor. I just roared laughing. I said, that's pretty well spoken. That's good. So here we are at 11 o'clock at night on summit night. This is the 6th night on the mountain. It's 11 o'clock at night, and the guide is working with me on the buff and everything. We've got our headlamps on. We are going to now hike from 11 o'clock at night until about between 7 and 8 in the morning, the next morning, to get to the summit of Kilimanjaro. I've got some really cool photos that were taken by a photographer. This is the base camp where we started from. You can see where the clouds are. And this is a time-lapse photo as we start the climb. Here's another time-lapse photo that, again, you can see the clouds. And this is at about 17,500 feet, but you can see the verticality. So you can imagine how difficult it is to go at that steepness and you just can't breathe. The oxygen is so low, and you just have to go so slow. And then when you take a break, this is taking a break in the middle of the night, you can't break very long because it's 0 degrees, it's 0 Fahrenheit, and you're freezing, and you will literally freeze. They'll tell you, just grab a quick snack, take a drink of water. Our camelbacks froze. Our camelback hoses froze. So we had to have water in a wide mouth jar so we could drink. The water, by the way, all had to be purified with iodine because you couldn't drink the water on the mountain because of the bacteria. So it's an amazing experience, and it was hard. And by the way, I'm now coaching my butt off, by the way. I'm coaching my butt off with my son and with everybody around me. Hang in there. We can do this. We're all going to do. I'm coaching my butt off to get everything done and to help us all get there. Now, I want to share with you a story where I believe the idea of well-being, teamwork, and resilience is brought to life. Here we are at about 18,500 feet. We've got about 1,000 vertical feet to go. We're getting very close to the crater, and you can see the clouds, and you can see how vertical it is. And all of a sudden, and our heads are down, all you can do is just keep your head down your poles, and it's like step, chuck, breathe. Step, chuck, breathe. And all of a sudden, my head's down, I hear all this noise around me, and I look up, and the rangers, there's park rangers because it's a national park, they're ushering people off the mountain because they're sick. They're throwing up, and they've got altitude sickness, so they're ushering people around us. And it's really noisy. There's about 10 people being ushered. Got them by both elbows, and they're sliding down the scree. You can see how loose it is, to get them down as fast as possible. So now I start thinking about my son. So I turned around and I said, Shen, how are you? This is Shen. He's standing there, his poles are here, and he just has his dead head down. He doesn't answer me. And I got a little scared, and I probably overreacted, but I said, buddy, you got to answer me. How are you? Are you okay? This is what my son does, 12 years old. And then our guide, there were 3 other 12-year-olds on the mountain. The 3 of them didn't make it. They didn't make it to the summit. The guide heard me get stern with Shen, and he comes back. Now remember, my son is fried. He's exhausted. He can't even take a step. And the guide comes back and says, Shen, do you want to go back? And right there I'm going, we're done. And I'm ready. I mean, we're done. We're not going to make it. And this is my 12-year-old son. But he can't move. And if I break down now, I apologize because it's really hard on me. But at that moment in time, remember I told you how everybody come around him and really showed him love and camaraderie. They played cards with him. Our fellow climbers had gotten ahead of us, and they were on the crater. It was about 400 meters above us. They had gotten to the crater. They came to see where we were, and they saw Shen stopped, and they started screaming and cheering for Shen. And I said, buddy, do you want to go? And I didn't know if that meant go back or go forward. And my son just started walking. He just started walking. And I'm going, okay, I guess we're going to do this. And he made it to the summit of Kilimanjaro. Thank you. So the beauty at the top of Kilimanjaro is amazing. The glaciers of Kilimanjaro are real. It is fascinating. It is unbelievable to be walking on the cone. And for those of you that don't know that I did this, when I got up there and I had that picture taken, I walked off, and there's a line of people, because of the people. That's the one thing. You want your picture in front of the sign. That's the only reason you really climb, is to get a photo in front of the sign. That's it. So there's a whole line. So I step away and I go over to my backpack, and Craig knows this. And I thought Craig. No, I don't know if Craig's here. If Craig Morris is here, thank you. Because Craig Morris sent me a Net Generation tennis racket and ball, and I hit a volley under the sign. The guides didn't know what I was doing. They'd never seen a tennis racket. They didn't know what I was doing. They thought I had a weapon. So here I am. Imagine this. They don't know what I'm doing, and I'm teaching them how to toss underhanded to me so I can hit a volley. I'm going, I just need the ball right here. And they were tossing all over the place, and people are angry. They're waiting for their picture. I'm going, just one. That's all I need. So I was able to get a picture of a Net Generation racket and ball under the Kilimanjaro sign. So now we had to get down. This was hard because look at the mud. When you get back down to the rainforest, this was really hard. But we made it down. After that next afternoon, we're driving back to Arusha. And by the way, this is kind of fun. If you could just look right here. Just look right here. We're in the bus, and somebody looked and they said, look, there's the mountain. And we were still like looking at the Rockies. When you're at the Rockies, you look here at the plane. We're going, I don't see the mountain. They go, look up. And you just didn't realize that the morning before, this was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the morning before we were there. And to have been there was just an amazing experience. And we got down and everything went well. So as I wrap this up, I just want to share with you a couple of things. In our lives, there will be pressure, there will be insecurity, there'll be trust issues. We're going to have trust issues. And we'll need resilience, we'll need teamwork, and the right balance of stress and recovery to prepare us for surprises. And we have to adapt. I believe sport teaches us a lot of this. And as we journey through life and business, we need to ask ourselves, what can I do to care for myself and others during times of uncertainty and when things get tough? Now the next story this is how I want to close with you. On one of our training hikes last spring, Shen and I were walking, and we ran into a couple, an older couple, with a teenage son and a big dog, and we were about 4 miles into the hike, so we were taking a break, getting a drink, and we just started talking to him. We had a nice conversation. And all of a sudden, the teenager, he wasn't so involved, and I said, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. And he said, well, I'm a high school senior, and I'm a junior, high school junior. I'm going to be a senior next year. And I said, well, what else are you doing? What are your hobbies? I'm in scouting. I said, really? What are you doing? And he said, well, I'm struggling right now in scouting because I've got everything done, but I haven't done my Eagle project yet. And I told him that I'm an Eagle Scout. Because once an eagle, always an eagle. And I said, look, it's the most significant thing I've ever done in my life that put me on a path to leadership. And I've got to encourage you, you've got to get that Eagle project done. And I'll tell you what, if you get that Eagle project done, here's my card. I gave him my card. And I said, you send me an invitation and Shen and I will come to your Eagle Scout ceremony. So out of the blue, last December, we're at home and we get a letter that has this note. Dr. Groppel, if you don't remember who I am, I'm the now Eagle Scout who you met at Stearns Woods a while ago. I wish to make good on my promise then. Thank you for your words of encouragement, and I hope you'll be able to attend. Sincerely, Matthew Tremblay. So on January the 6th this year, I was able to take my son to this Eagle Scout ceremony. So then we get to point 10 in everything I want to leave you with. Dream, set your aspiration. You know, I couldn't play in the backyard with my son. My knees were so bad, let alone trek on a mountain. So the whole thing is don't let whatever, you fill in that blank. Don't let whatever it is fills in that blank, hold you back if there's something you can do. All right? So point number 10 is keep climbing. Keep climbing. Let's go climb a mountain together. Thank you all very much.